Welcome, everyone. I'm Nancy Hall-Behrens, Director of Congregational Life at Westminster. I'm glad that you've joined us today for this Broadening Horizons talk on the Appalachian Trail. Today, we're going to get back to nature. A quick housekeeping note, after the formal part of today's presentation, there will be a time for questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A written feature on the Zoom window to write down any questions that you have. You can write your questions at any point. They don't have to wait until the end. And then we also ask that you not record or take screenshots of the presentation because we're already recording it and it will be on the Westminster YouTube channel later and you can share that with friends. Last night, I usually start with an opening prayer, and last night I discovered some words of wisdom from John Muir, which I wish I had used for my devotional last week when I did a thing on forest bathing, and I think it's good inspiration to start today's talk on hiking the Appalachian Trail. John Muir says, "Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul. Keep close to nature's heart and break clear away once in a while and climb a mountain or spend a week in the woods. Wash your spirit clean. Oh, these vast, calm, measureless mountain days, days in whose light everything seems equally divine, opening 1,000 windows to show us God." We're lucky today to have 3 generations of the Westminster family who have all been through hikers on the Appalachian Trail. Dan Judy is Vice President at North Star Research. Eric Folkerts is a student out in Colorado, joining us across the miles. And Tom Geiger is longtime member of Westminster who splits his time between Alexandria and Arizona. I also want to introduce Cindy Smith, who is our Chair of Congregational Life. Cindy.
Well, welcome everyone. We're thrilled that you're here with us today. Doing a little research myself, I found out that the Appalachian Trail is the longest hiking only footpath in the world. Almost 2,200 miles long, it traverses 14 states from Maine to Georgia. As Nancy mentioned, those who hike the full length of the trail are called thru-hikers, and all 3 of our speakers have accomplished that feat. So let's go hiking today with Dan, Tom, and Eric. Thank you.
Over to you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cindy and Nancy and Eric and Tom. Thanks for joining us. In addition to that very nice introduction from Nancy, I would like each of us to have sort of an AT introduction to all of you. And what I will ask Eric and Tom to do, and I will do myself, is tell you our trail name, which is most hikers go by a name that is not their own along the trail. The year we thru hiked, the direction we thru hiked, which is an important matter, and also the length of the trail the year you hiked. And so my trail name was Optimus Prime, or OP for short. I thru hiked in the year 2000, 20 years ago, when I was right out of college, very young. I thru hiked southbound from Maine to Georgia, and the trail was 2,167 miles long that year. Eric, would you like to go next?
Yeah, cool. My trail name was Littlefoot. I hiked in 2016, so about 4 years ago. And I also went southbound from Maine to Georgia like Dan. And I believe the mileage the year I did it was 2,190. Tom?
My trail name was Chosky. I hiked the trail in 2004. I did it south to north, and I'm not sure of the precise, but it was like 2,172 or 3, something like that.
Sounds pretty precise. Great. Well, let me share my screen here. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Very good. So before I would briefly just want to talk to you about the history of the trail, and then a couple other quick facts before we really get into it, and I bring in Eric and Tom. The trail was conceived by a planner from New England named Benton Mackay. In 1921, he had the idea of a trail that would run from New England to the southeastern United States. Myron Avery was the first director of what was then called the Appalachian Trail Conference. It's now called the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And he was the guy who really sort of was the driving force behind actually putting that vision into reality. And then Earl Schaefer in 1948, after he returned from the war, was the first person to thru-hike the trail. Back in those days, it was believed that it couldn't be done. And so his trail name was the Crazy One. People thought he was crazy for even attempting this. But these three, Mackay, Avery, and Schaefer, are sort of the secular hiking trinity of the AT. What is a thru-hiker? A thru-hiker is somebody who's hiked the entire trail, but someone who's hiked it all in one season. There are a lot of people who have hiked the whole trail but in sections and chunks. Those people are known as 2,000 milers. All thru-hikers are also 2,000 milers, but a thru-hiker is someone who's hiked the whole thing in one season. Around 3,000 people these days attempt to thru-hike each year. Between 80 and 90% of thru-hikers are northbounders like Tom. It is very much the traditional way of hiking. People start in Georgia in the late winter, early spring, and follow the seasons, spring, summer, and fall up into Maine. Only a small percentage of people who are not quite right in the head do it the opposite way. So that, I think, puts Eric and I in that category. About a quarter of thru-hikers are women. And over the 2,000-mile 14-state journey, a thru-hiker will gain and lose 464,000 feet of elevation. And I thank Tom for this fact, which is the equivalent of 16 Mount Everest. And most importantly, not to toot our own horns, but for every 5 people who start a thru-hike, 4 won't make it. So I consider myself one of the fortunate 1 in 5 who's made it, and am happy to be here with my friends Eric and Tom, who did as well. And so let's go ahead and start down the trail. We are going to start in Maine. Like I said, it's kind of the backwards way, and with apologies to Tom, since Eric and I both did it this way, this is the way I started it. So these are a picture of me starting and Tom finishing. So Tom, why don't you talk a little bit about what we see here?
Well, this is Mount Katahdin. I was feeling this was the end of the road, end of the hike for me. So I was feeling in a kind of celebratory mood. The wonderful words that Larry uses in his benediction, then the mountains and hills shall break forth before you in singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come up the fir tree. Instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle. Well, I hiked 2,172 or 3 miles, and not a single tree clapped, and not a single mountain raised its voice in singing. And instead of the myrtle and the fir, I got briars. And but I just want to say this was the reason I put on the tuxedo coat is this is kind of a New Year's Eve. It's kind of a old lang syne, to use Robbie Burns Scott's poem. You're looking back on all the friends you've made, all the times you've had, but you're also looking to the future of how the trail has changed you and how you're really. It changed my life in ways that I won't get into more. But it was just well, I'll stop there and let someone else talk. Yeah.
Sure. And here's a picture from Eric of a picture of the terrain in Maine. And I have to say, this is a very Maine-like picture. Eric, you want to talk about Maine a little bit?
Yeah, Maine, also New Hampshire, but mainly, I believe this picture was from southern Maine. This picture is representative of much of the trail. You know, a lot of the trail down south is nice and flat and pretty easy going, and a lot of the trail up north looks like this picture, where it doesn't really look like much of a trail. So it's a lot of rock hopping, and maybe it's kind of hard to find your way or find the trail, and definitely more difficult. You cover way less miles up north than you would in the other states.
Definitely. And Eric, what was it like for you? I thought Tom was very eloquent talking about what it was like finishing. What was it like for you starting up at Mount Katahdin?
Yeah, I mean, I was so excited to start, so I think that's kind of what helped me. But I think this kind of terrain is what turns a lot of people away when they start going southbound. Um, I had to keep reminding myself that it wasn't going to last like this forever, and I just had to get through these tough sections. So it's kind of interesting to think about how a northbound hiker like Tom might feel when he's at this point on the trail. Because for him, the hardest part is kind of towards the end, terrain wise. And I'm sure northbounders are also, kind of ready to be done at that point. And yeah, it's a whole different challenge. And yeah.
Well, if I might just jump in and say that as I was hiking Maine, when you get to the Maine border, you've done 1,900 miles, and but you say, oh well, another 280 miles, that shouldn't be a big deal. But you still have 100,000 feet of gain, 3 Everest, and I'll never forget. It seemed like every mountain I climbed in Maine, someone would say to me as I looked exhausted, they'd say, "Don't worry, this is the last big climb before Katahdin." If I heard that a dozen times. And I will say that there are parts of Pennsylvania that can rival this photo.
Definitely. So after you get through Maine, you go through New Hampshire and Vermont, which are New Hampshire especially just absolutely dramatically beautiful in the White Mountains. Eric, this is an incredible picture. Tell us a little bit about the White Mountains.
Yeah, the White Mountains are in New Hampshire. In my opinion, it's probably the most beautiful section of trail on the entire thing. This picture obviously shows that. The weather can get pretty crazy up there. Luckily, I was up there, on a nice sunny day, but I think more often than not, you can't see much. It's usually pretty cloudy and rainy. Yeah, it's an absolutely gorgeous section of trail. It's tough. It's a lot of up and downs and kind of like the picture we saw previously. But yeah, it's just beautiful. And for me, I think a big challenge was not encountering this kind of beauty later on in the trail. So I kind of felt like I was getting the best of the trail early on. And it was definitely a mental challenge after this, because I wasn't able to experience scenes like this later on.
Here's a picture of me in the White Mountains. As Eric noted, it's often foggy, cloudy, a little bit rainy. That's, I believe, Mount Adams in the Presidential Range. And Mount Washington, which a lot of people watching may be familiar with, it's the highest peak in the Northeast and kind of a famous peak. It's also famous for having the highest recorded surface air wind speed on planet Earth. And the day I got to the top, a storm rolled in while I was at the visitor center, so intense that I had to be driven off the mountain. I couldn't hike off the mountain that night. So that was that. Yeah, and then it drove me back up the next morning, and it was beautiful. But Tom, do you have some reflections on the New Hampshire Vermont stretch?
Well, I would say this, that, well, they're absolutely, the views are spectacular because the tree line is lower. But because the mountain's so far north, that the tree line's at about 4,800 feet. So, and of course they're very high. And so you get these absolutely spectacular views. But when you're coming north, you're worried about getting there before bad weather sets in, because as you pointed out, not only I had heard not only the highest wind velocity ever recorded on Earth, not just in the U.S., but ever recorded on Earth, but also the lowest temperature. And it's I can't pull the quote, but there's a little sign as you're going north that says, it says essentially lots of people have died on this trail. Yeah. And if you get in by bad weather, do thus and so, turn back. So it's intimidating but absolutely breathtaking, spectacular.
Yeah, there's a sign at the top of Mount Washington that proudly proclaims it to have the worst weather in the world.
Mhm.
And I can vouch certainly for that.
Yeah. I think a fun thing to do sometimes is during the winter, you can actually go on one of the many weather websites and look up, because there's actually a weather station on top of Mount Washington. You can look up what the wind speed and temperature is. And I've seen temperatures as low as -80 with the wind chill. If you, so just a little something fun to look up sometime.
Yeah, they say because of the elevation, it's more like being 1,500 miles farther north or something in terms of what the climate
Mhm.
can be.
Well, continuing through the rest of New England, through Massachusetts and Connecticut, here's a picture I took in Connecticut, and that's very typical of just that area of the trail. Much more relatively flat. The mountains are not quite as high, not quite as dramatic, but very pretty. And then there's also a picture here of Tom. And Tom, I wanted to, the photos that you sent me, I thought it was great that a lot of them included pictures of people that you had hiked with or had met along the way. And I just thought that you could talk a little bit about just what it's like with the people that you meet and the relationship that you build when you're out hiking like that.
I first met this young woman in Tennessee. She was hiking with another young lady who wasn't able to picture them both. She was the first person and maybe the only person I have met from Tasmania. She's Australian. And so how many times do you run into Tasmania? And she had moved from Australia to London. She worked in the National Health Service in London. And this was a break that she had taken. When I first met her in Tennessee, I guess I had been on the trail a while, and actually I was hiking a little faster than she and her friend. But by the time we got up to Massachusetts and Connecticut, they were leaving me. This is a skin of a snake, and I had wanted to say that we didn't, of course, kill the snake. We just found it along the way. But I think there's a quote that reminded me of, it's an African proverb. If you want to travel quickly, travel alone. If you want to travel far, travel together. And the wonderful thing about the Appalachian Trail was, for me, that sometimes I was alone when I kind of would speed up, but I would run into people and then meet up with them again at another point in the trail.
Definitely. Eric, do you have anything you want to add here?
Sure. Yeah, he's exactly right. I remember meeting people from all over the world. I don't know if I ever met anyone from New Zealand, but I remember actually meeting a lot of Germans on the trail, because apparently that year a bunch of people in Germany watched a documentary about the Appalachian Trail and decided to come over and do it. So yeah, it's kind of funny. I remember meeting a lot of Germans. And Tom is also right that you kind of go back and forth a lot with people you meet. So you might hike with them and go at a different pace for the next few weeks, and maybe you'll see him again a month later or something, and you can catch up. And yeah, it's pretty amazing how all the different people you can meet on the trail, for sure.
All right, so New York and New Jersey is the next phase. Both of these states are relatively short in terms of the distance you cover. I'll let Eric explain his more interesting photo in a second. The photo here on the right, that's the Hudson River, and it's at a place called Bear Mountain, New York. The reason I included that there is because when you after you cross the Hudson River and you kind of come down to the banks, it's the lowest spot elevation-wise on the AT. And actually not too far from here, a little bit, I think further south of here, there's a spot where on a clear day, you could actually see the New York City skyline, which was kind of cool. That's how close you are to New York City at one point. And it was strange looking back. It was a clear day and I could see the skyline. And about a year later, that skyline changed kind of, irrevocably on September 11th. But when I was looking at it, it was kind of the old New York skyline, which was pretty cool. But Eric, what's going on here? They say a thru hiker will sleep anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I included this picture to kind of show all the different sleeping situations you might encounter as a thru hiker. Not only do we sleep in tents and in, wooden shelters and on the ground and wherever, but we may also sleep on top of picnic tables, or at least I did. I had a guidebook that laid out some places to sleep at this one point in New York along the trail. And it was a couple miles off, and it ended up just being a picnic table. And I had to sleep on top of it because there was a family of skunks that was kind of living there. And it just goes to show the variety of places you may have to lay down on the trail. So
Tom?
Well, in New York, I do remember, the Bear Mountain, and I do remember it's the only place on the trail that I can recall where you walk through a zoo. I don't know if
Right.
that's still true
oh,
or
that's
not.
right. Yeah.
They had a bear there that was the saddest looking bear I think I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah,
Bear-
I think I actually had a hard time finding the trail that went through the zoo. So I was walking around the zoo for quite a while.
No, and there was, I didn't take a picture of it, but there was actually a commuter train stop that along the trail where you could take a commuter train in.
I remember that.
Uh,
So next up is Pennsylvania, and here's a photo of a very happy looking Tom Geiger. What are you so happy about, Tom?
Listen, first of all, I want to put a plug in for the Presbyterian Hunger Program. I did the hike as a fundraiser for the Presbyterian Hunger Program. Hunter and Ruth Farrell were missionaries there at the time. I think some of the people watching may have met Hunter and Ruth over the years. Eleanor Geiger in Lima, Peru, teamed up with Ruth Farrell, and they created a series of artisan groups that made products that were sold at Westminster at the Alternative Giving Fair for many years. And it's very hard to design programs that actually put money in the pockets of the poorest of the poor. And this is what Eleanor and Ruth were able to do. And I got pledges of a penny a mile, a nickel a mile, a dime a mile, et cetera. And we wound up raising $16,000. With respect to Pennsylvania, I would just make one plug for Pine Grove Furnace State Park, where there is something called the Iron Master's Mansion. It has a secret basement where runaway slaves were hidden. And I got to go climb down into that basement, and with the lights out, completely dark. Can you imagine being down there with a family, hearing the dogs barking, hearing the hoofs of the bounty hunters, prowling around, and having the owner of the mansion. I don't know if it's still a state property, if it's something people can do, but just to go see that, there's a lot of history on the Appalachian Trail, and certainly one of the more dramatic parts of that history is that it was part of the Underground Railroad.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember meeting a northbounder, I think somewhere in New York or New Jersey, and it was the only Black woman that I saw through hiking my entire trip. I saw a number of Black men, not a lot, but a number. The only Black woman I saw, and she was hiking from south to north, and her trail name was Harriet Tubman, which I thought was pretty cool. Going from south to north. But yeah, and as Tom said, that Pine Grove Furnace State Park is not far from where we live here, so it's pretty easy a relatively easy trip if folks want to go out there and check it out. There's also a museum there dedicated to the trail that people can check out. I think we got another photo from Pennsylvania here from Tom. Eric, what's the Pennsylvania is infamous. What's the word that comes to mind when people say Pennsylvania on the AT?
Probably rocky.
Yep.
It's not like the Rocky up in Maine or New Hampshire. It's, from what I remember, it's more like small, kind of like, head-sized sharp rocks that just kind of tear up your shoes. I definitely wore out my shoes way faster in Pennsylvania than I did in the other states. And I met a lot of people who would just kind of go to a Walmart and get the cheapest pair of shoes they could find and wear those just through Pennsylvania. and snakes, as this picture shows. I actually saw quite a number of snakes. If that's the word that you were looking for, I apologize.
Oh, well, rocks was the word I was looking for, but there are a lot of snakes. You're right about that. How many years did you guys go through total? Do you remember?
I went through 4, and I probably should have gone through 5 or 6 because I hurt my feet pretty badly wearing my shoes for too long. So.
What about you, Tom? How many did you go
I went through 4 pair, and I even heard of one guy who was on a limited budget, and to save his shoes, he took them off and wore them barefooted, which I can't quite understand.
Yeah.
But he was trying to save his shoes for Pennsylvania, doing some of those Virginia trails, maybe where, although Virginia can be rocky, but
that does remind me of one person I met who made sandals out of strips of tires and actually wore those sandals through the White Mountains in New Hampshire, which I thought was very impressive and kind of crazy.
Very true.
I ran into 2 young women who were hiking the trail barefooted, and I couldn't believe it. I had heard about them, but then when I actually saw them, I don't remember their trail names, but I thought later one should be Planter and the other Fasciitis.
Yep.
I love it.
But in any event, I think at least doing a little research on it, I think several women have hiked, but they've really done about 2/3 of the hike barefooted. Thank goodness, not the whole thing, because parts of it just would be impossible.
So after Pennsylvania, there's a very brief stretch of the trail that goes through Maryland and West Virginia. The photo on the left of me is in West Virginia near Harper's Ferry. So again, not far from here. If people wanted to take a nice day trip, that's a great day trip out there. And then Eric, tell us about what's going on in your photo on the right.
Yeah, so that photo that I'm holding up was taken in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. And that is kind of considered the unofficial halfway point on the Appalachian Trail. And most, if not all, thru-hikers pass, or they make a stop at the Appalachian Trail Conservancy in Harper's Ferry. And when you stop by, they take your picture and you write your trail name and your information, and you can see they have a number at the top, 163. I was the 163rd southbounder to come through that year. And they keep a catalog and records of all of these photos that are taken. So you can actually go visit the Appalachian Trail Conservancy in Harper's Ferry, and you can go find my picture, or I'm sure Tom or Dan's, and you can go back decades and look through all the thru-hikers that have come through, and it's pretty amazing, all the records they keep there.
All right, now on to Virginia, which is, it's a special state on the trail because it has the most miles. In fact, I think almost a quarter of the trail goes through Virginia, and it is, it's long. It becomes a slog at times just because you're in the state for so long, but it is very, very beautiful. Eric, I think, is your picture taken in Southwest Virginia?
It is, yep, yeah. I just thought that was a beautiful area. I want to say that was a little bit before Grayson Highlands. But yeah, that's not totally representative of the trail in Virginia. At least from what I remember, most of the trail was kind of hiking through the Green Tunnel is what people call it. Just miles and miles of rhododendrons, and you're in the forest, and there's some great views in Virginia, like the one here, and there's also just a lot of walking through the forest. So.
Definitely. And on the post there in the foreground of Eric's picture is a painted white stripe. That's called a white blaze. And that's what marks the trail, all 2,000 miles of it. And you don't really need a map to hike the AT. You can just follow the white blazes. And there are estimated to be over 150,000 of those stretching the course of the trail. You can generally see the next one from the one you're standing by, not always, but it's pretty well marked. But in a few pictures here and there, you might have seen a white stripe painted somewhere and thought, what is that? And that's what it is. The other photo, Tom, is that you in a time machine or?
Well, that's our younger son, Ben. And the nice thing is that as I hiked the trail, I had different people join me, and Ben flew out. He was in California at the time, but he flew out and he hiked a few days. It's really unfair to have people who aren't in shape and aren't hiking to suddenly join somebody who's already hiked several hundred miles, because you've gone through the blisters, you've gone through the aches and pains, and Ben's feet got pretty badly blistered. This is it's not far from Tinker Cliffs, not far from McAfee Knob. And I think we were on Dragon's Tooth or something like that. A quick comment on the West Virginia, Maryland. The northbounders, some of them like to camp out in Virginia right next to Harper's Ferry, hike into Harper's Ferry, hike all of Maryland, and hike into Pennsylvania in one day. And they'd get up in the middle of the night to do that so that they could say they hiked in 4 states in one day. Maybe Eric did that.
I think I remember going for it, and I think I bailed just because
it's crazy.
Just because I was too tired. I think it's called the 4-state challenge. I want to say it's a little over 40 miles, and if I remember correctly, I think I did 36 or 37 that day, and
wow,
didn't feel like doing it anymore. So
was that your longest day hiking, Eric?
It was not. My longest day was actually my last day on the trail, which was, I want to say, like a 42-mile day. Yeah, I was pretty ready to be done.
Tom, what was your longest hiking day in terms of mileage?
I thought it was 26, but as I looked at my notes to get ready for this, it was 24. So 24 miles.
I hiked 27 miles one day, I think was my longest day. So some more in Virginia. The picture on the lower right, that is in the Grayson Highlands, which is down in Southwest Virginia, and there are wild ponies there that congregate around the trail, usually because I think they try to get food from hikers. One of them, I was standing looking at them, and I noticed one of them was chewing on one of my pack straps as the pack gets covered with sweat and dirt and salt, and so I had to kind of give it a whack to get it off of my pack. That's not me in the picture; it's a guy I was hiking with. But then Tom, who is in the picture here by the shelter?
That's John Hanson, Jenny Hanson's dad, and he helped me. A wonderful thing, when I got to the sort of the DC area, I stayed at home and would do day hikes with folks who were interested and wanted to do the Appalachian Trail. And John Hanson joined me. I forget the name of that shelter, but I don't know the name, but it was an unforgettable experience, because as I took that picture of John, I was stepping back and I wanted to get a little bit more, and there were 2 copperheads curled up. I've never seen 2 beside each other, and I almost stepped on them, but seeing them at the last minute, I fell over. And so John must have thought I had passed out, or it was the end of the trail. Fortunately, they didn't bite me, and it wasn't, but it was great to have people. Our former associate pastor, Gene Kendall, also came and helped hike in the Shenandoah National Park with me.
Cool. Eric, do you want to talk for a second, since there's a shelter in this picture? Do you want to tell folks a little bit about the shelters and what that's like?
Sure, yeah. So as you can see, there's kind of a lean-to, kind of a three-sided wooden shelter there, and those are actually pretty common along the AT. I don't remember the exact number, but I want to say it's a little over 200, or maybe closer to 3. But these shelters are scattered along the entire trail, and some are literally right off the trail. Some may be a couple miles off the trail, but they allow thru-hikers to sleep in them when need be. And some of them are really nice and fancy, and some of them are mice and snake infested, or maybe they smell. Some of them have been there since the 1940s, and some of them may just be a few years old. So
Okay, on into Tennessee and North Carolina. I showed you the lowest point on the AT elevation-wise at the Hudson River. The photo of me on the left is at the highest point on the trail. That's Clingman's Dome in Tennessee, which is about 6,600 feet in the Smoky Mountains. And that is the summit of Clingman's Dome. That's the highest point on the AT. And you can see that the weather that day was not great. In fact, the weather almost my entire trip through the Smoky Mountains was terrible, which is too bad because it is truly beautiful. I look a lot happier in that picture than I really was. Tom, the weather in your picture is a little better. You want to talk about where you are there?
Yeah, this is, by the way, when I went over Clingman's Dome, the same thing. I couldn't see a thing. And a person who was hiking ahead of me said he had seen a wild boar across the trail. It was so cloudy I didn't, and I was frustrated because I wanted to be able to see a wild boar. I'm here going into Irwin, Tennessee. I don't know if it's Irwin or Irvin, I forget, but in any event, it's on the Nolichucky River. And I stayed with a trail angel who had opened her house up to thru-hikers. Her name was Miss Janet. She's kind of famous on the trail. And so I spent a couple of nights with Miss Janet and learned what a potato cannon was, which I had not before. It was a beautiful time of year. Of course, see here, there are no leaves. There are fewer leaves on the trees because I'm coming up from the south, and it had not seasoned. The leaves hadn't gotten out on the trees at that point. Yeah.
And in fact, here's another photo where there are definitely no leaves on the trees.
Yeah, this was right outside Franklin, North Carolina, and I guess it got down in the low 30s or high, well, I guess in just below freezing and maybe high 20s. And I was so glad, as it was snowing that night and I was sleeping in the shelter, I was just so afraid it was going to be like an 18-inch snow or something, and I wouldn't be able to find the trail or see those white blazes on the trees. Might be kind of hard to find. But the buddy I was hiking with and I hustled into Franklin, and we stayed at another place that's almost like a Trail Angel place. It's a Haven Motel, Ron Haven. A lot of folks, hikers stay. He was actually out at the trailhead picking people up.
Eric, do you have any reflections about North Carolina, Tennessee, the Smoky Mountains?
a little bit. I never encountered quite as much snow as Tom did here in this picture. I did encounter some frost and some snow around this same area, but just at a different time in the year, you know, in November. Yeah, so I guess we can both recall that it was pretty cold. Beautiful area though. I love the Smokies. Other than the Northeast up in Maine, New Hampshire, the Smokies were probably up there on the prettiest spots on the trail.
And then after many months, or for Tom, just getting started, you get to Georgia. And so Eric told us about your long overnight push to make it to the end. Tell us about
Yeah. Yeah, you can tell I'm wearing my shorts, my running shorts. I can admit I didn't pack too well towards the end of the trail. I didn't really have any warm pants to wear. I've got my jacket and gloves on and everything, but yeah, at this point in the trail, I was pretty tired and kind of ready to be done, and so I decided to hike the last 40 something miles, just kind of straight through. I want to say it took me 15, 16, 17 hours, something like that, and ended up finishing the trail there on Springer Mountain in Georgia at like 1 or 2 in the morning.
Wow.
And so yeah, it was a pretty strange finish. I remember just being too tired to really feel anything, and so I ended up hiking a few miles back north on the trail to meet up with some other hikers and sleep with them. And then we all woke up in the morning and went back to Springer Mountain for a real kind of celebratory finish.
Wow.
That's great. And Tom, this is the day, Tom, you started?
Right. That would, you see, let's see, April, I believe it was April 7th. And Eleanor and her brother Bob and her sister-in-law accompanied me up there. And I wasn't too worried about finding my way on the trail. Of course, as you've mentioned, it's fairly well marked. And I had the benefit of hiking with a person who had done the first 100 miles of the trail a year before. So that gave me a lot of confidence that we were gonna do okay and find our way down the trail. But I was worried about Eleanor getting down the mountain, getting off Springer, and it turned out it was a bit of an adventure. And they wound up, I think, she and her brother and sister-in-law being guided down by some kind of local there who knew the roads. But it was, it was obviously an exhilarating time to get started.
And then finally, my finishing picture looks a little different from Eric's. I, as many of you know, grew up in Georgia, and Springer Mountain is only about an hour and a half from Atlanta. It's less than a couple hours from Atlanta. So I had a lot of family and friends who were very interested and excited in coming up. And a couple hours after I got there, there's a Forest Service road and a parking lot about a mile from the Springer summit. And a big group of friends and family came up to meet me. In this picture, interestingly, if you look right above me in a blue jacket is Carolin, then Duffy, now Judy, who at the time was just a friend. And so it's neat that she was there that day. If you look on the back row, second from the right in a black jacket is my younger sister, Laura, who is known on the trail as Steady, who also thru-hiked southbound in 2004, the year Tom did. And then on the front row, bottom right in the black sweater and black hat is my dad, Richard Judy, who thru-hiked southbound in 1973. He was one of the first probably 100 people to thru-hike. And then my mom, Patsy, is right in front of me, kind of leaning back, and then a lot of other family and friends are there. But it was a wonderful day, amazing day. And the cool thing about it was we hiked back to the cars, and in like an hour and a half, I was home in my living room, which was kind of surreal to have been out on the trail for that long and be back. So let me stop my screen share and see if we have some questions coming in. We have a few more minutes. Let's see. Okay, so someone asks, did we choose our own trail names or were they bestowed upon you by other hikers? That's a good question. Littlefoot, do you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, I don't know about Dan and Tom, but mine was bestowed upon me by someone else. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's generally frowned upon to choose your own trail name. People tend to get them after they, make a clumsy move, or it's just something that kind of makes them them. So for example, I got my trail name, Littlefoot. It refers to the show Land Before Time. Littlefoot, the dinosaur in that animated show. because I often ate dinosaur egg oatmeal for breakfast, the oatmeal with the sugary eggs that turned into dinosaurs. And I was also listening to a lot of old music, and so people called me a dinosaur. So Littlefoot kind of stuck.
You're probably one of the youngest people out there too, which is so funny.
Yeah, right.
And then Tom, what was your trail name again?
My trail name was Chosky, and I was afraid somebody would give me a name. I ran into one lady, female hiker, who had some problems with her stove, and she caught a shelter on fire, and she became Bernie. And so the rest of that. Then I also ran into a guy who was 78. I'm 78 now, but he was 78 doing a hike, said he'd had a quadruple bypass. He got lost off the trail. His trail name was Wanderlust, and he got lost off of the trail. So when he got back on the trail, everybody called him Wanderlost.
And what's the genesis of yours? You said you
Chosky those are the Inca messengers who carry. The Incas, of course, didn't have horses, but they had a road system through the Andes, and they needed a system of communication. So you might say it was the Inca Pony Express without the ponies. They were the runners. And because I was raising funds for a charity that was focused on alleviating poverty in Peru, I picked a name that seemed like a nice name, an indigenous name, and also one that, well, it takes some explaining along the trail, but I was afraid how I might be named because I was hiking with Tarzan. He was a 22-year-old rower from George Mason University, and I didn't want people to call me Cheetah. So I thought I'd better have my own trail name.
That's pretty funny. That's great.
Eric started without a trail name, and a couple weeks in Maine, was at a shelter. It was horrible weather, and there were a bunch of people in there, most of whom at that point in the trail were kind of Generation X guys who at that time were in their early to mid 20s. And we were just like, shooting the bull and talking about stuff and, Generation X popular culture. And the conversation turned to the old Transformers cartoon. And the guys found my knowledge of that cartoon so apparently encyclopedic that they christened me Optimus Prime, who was the lead character in the show. And I resisted it, but you can't resist these things. They choose, and it stuck. And so I became Optimus Prime, or OP most of the time. So Pastor Patrick has a really good question. What would you say you were hoping for going in, and did that happen for you? Kind of an existential question, not surprisingly, a good ministerial question.
I had an experience that I think made the whole 2,000 miles worth it. I was hiking in Virginia. Lady picks us up, trail angel picks us up, take us to get some food. Ben and I were together. She takes us, she says, she waits for us to buy our food, and then says, why don't you have lunch at our place, which is near the trail? And she tells the story that it's her second marriage for her. She tells the story of her daughter who was on drugs in Houston, had 2 children, lost custody of those children. And then she and her second husband were going to hike the Appalachian Trail. And the daughter, who had a problem with substance abuse, learned they were going to hike the Appalachian Trail and asked to join them. And her second husband said, sure. Didn't think she'd last a week because she hiked the whole trail. She turned her life around. She regained partial custody of her kids. And for me, that was a story that just out of the blue. And my son, Ben and I were hiking together at that time. So it just kind of made hiking 2,000 miles worth it. It was a very special moment.
Eric, what about you?
Yeah, I think going into it, I tried to be pretty open-minded because, yeah, I definitely didn't have a reason as to, why I wanted to get out of it when I first started. One situation that comes out to my mind is I think I was going through the Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, and I had stopped off the trail at one of the little gift shops or whatever, and I had fallen asleep at a booth. And I remember one of the park rangers kind of nudged my shoulder and woke me up and gave me an ice cream that he had bought for me and told me that he had thru-hiked the trail back in the 80s and commended me for what I was doing and told me that I was going to base my whole life off of this experience. And although I haven't done that, one thing I've gotten from the trail is, whenever I go through a hard time or something or any kind of challenge, I often think back to the trail and kind of say to myself, well, you know what, I did this on the trail. I went through that on the trail. I went through that really hard experience. So this is nothing compared to that. Situations like that is kind of what I got from it, and the ability to compare what I'm going through now to what I went through then. So it's definitely given me some strength for sure.
That's great. We have just 2 more quick questions, and then we'll wrap up. How many times did you get off the trail to recoup some? Tom, you said that you did some day hikes living at home when you got to the Mid-Atlantic.
No, I was unabashedly a slack packer. I didn't even consider that a shameful designation. I was 62. A slack packer means you day hike. Essentially, you leave your main heavy backpack somewhere at a hostel or something, and someone drives you or pick you up at a trailhead and bring you back to the hostel where your backpack is. And I did that as often as I could. So I did a lot of day hiking in that sense. And I figured I didn't want, at 62, didn't want to beat up my knees. I didn't want this to be the last hike I ever did. So, so I was, I was taking the opportunity to stay in shelters and do day hikes as much as I could.
Yeah. Eric, what about you?
Yeah, I don't know how many times I got off the trail to recoup some. A good term that comes to mind is a 0 day, which is a big term in thru hiking, which is basically taking a day off to do 0 miles. There were times where I would go for a few weeks without taking any time off, and there was also times where I would get into the bad habit of taking a day off and then doing like a big 30-something mile day and then taking a day off and then doing another big day, which is is definitely a bad habit. But yeah, that's definitely what I did.
Yeah, I had maybe 8 or 9 0 days through the course of the trip. And what I enjoyed was a couple of times my parents came up for a few days to see me and slack pack me. We'd stay in a hotel and I would be able to hike a lot of miles with no pack. And I enjoyed doing that. I'm kind of with Tom, like, you're already hiking so many miles. If there's a chance to make a few of them a little easier, I didn't consider that cheating for me. And last question, what one thing did you carry with you that you found most valuable? I saw this a minute ago, so I thought about it for a second. And my answer is that I got to the point where I carried so little. I mean, that everything I carried was valuable. That I didn't have any one thing that, at least for me, kind of everything I carried was an essential item. Really maybe the only thing that I carried that I didn't absolutely have to survive was, maybe a t-shirt that I could put on if I went into town and a book that I could read at night. Yeah. So I wouldn't say there was a single thing. That everything kind of takes on an essential, valuable nature when you want to carry as little on your back as possible.
Yeah, I can safely say that what it isn't was a knife or a pocket knife or some kind of survivalist tool. A lot of people kind of jump to that and say, oh, well, didn't you carry a weapon or to protect yourself or whatever? And so really, I think what I found most valuable was a good pair of socks. Really, because I had a hard time keeping my feet dry and preventing blisters. So a good pair of socks, I think, came in handy more than any kind of lighter or stove or knife or whatever. So
well, I changed out my gear. I started out with a heavier when it was cold, and then as summer hit, I switched to a different sleeping bag and tent. And so I don't know that I had I had the same pack. I still had the same pack, which I hiked on the Camino de Santiago. I took the pack that I had done on the Appalachian Trail. But if I could show you, I don't know if anybody can see. This is the stove that I carried for 2,000 miles. It weighs about an ounce. It's made out of a Pepsi can, and getting things light was very important.
Yeah, and to go off of what Tom said, you're probably familiar with cat food can stoves, which is what I carried, which is, for those who don't know, is basically a empty can of cat food, and with some holes punched in the top, and you pour some fuel in it, put your pot on top and light it, and that's your stove. And I originally had a canister stove, like many, but it was stolen up in New Hampshire. So I resorted to making a stove out of a can of cat food at a dollar store. So
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you. And Nancy, I think you want to jump in to say farewell, but thank you, Eric and Tom, for joining me on this. And thank you, everybody, for watching. This has been a lot of fun.
Right. And I just wanted to add my thanks to Dan, Tom, and Eric for taking us on a hike, a very long hike today. I loved the little figure that kept going down the map. It took me a moment, and then I realized it was moving along with the presentation. I've hiked bits and pieces of the Appalachian Trail, but now I can say maybe that I've hiked the whole thing in one day. So I'm very excited about that. I'm a virtual thru hiker. Thanks to everybody who attended today. Watch for upcoming other Broadening Horizons programs that we're doing to help us make new discoveries and learn more about our world. And I'll just end with this. And now let us give thanks for God's good earth, and may we take the steps needed to protect our forests, parks, and environment to keep them healthy for generations of hikers to come. And I'd like to end with John Muir's, one of his most famous quotes: "Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into trees. The winds will blow their own freshness into you, and the storms their energy, while cares will drop off like autumn leaves." Wow. Amen, and thank you.
Amen.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, everybody.